Mara moved quickly between the polished tables, carrying a tray filled with glasses that clinked softly with each step. She had learned how to walk without making a sound, how to smile without forcing it, and how to disappear into the background even when the room was full of powerful people. That night, as the warm glow of chandeliers washed over the dining hall, she felt the air buzzing with the same energy she felt at every event hosted by the elite club. But still, something about this evening felt heavier, as if trouble was quietly waiting beneath the surface. Most of the guests who entered the club barely noticed her, except for the occasional polite nod or distracted smile. Mara didn't mind. Being unseen had become a normal part of her life, something she had slowly accepted over the years. She wasn't there to be admired. She was there to work, to earn her share, and to keep her mind busy so it didn't drift too far back into memories. She tried hard to tuck away. The grand piano stood near the center of the hall, shining under the lights like a prized piece of art. Every time Mara walked past it, she looked at it for just a second longer than necessary. It reminded her of a version of herself she once believed in, a girl who used to sit for hours practicing scales, dreaming of stages and applause. But that dream had slipped away when life took an unexpected turn, and now the piano was only a reminder of everything that had been left behind. Still, she couldn't help feeling something whenever she saw it. A faint spark, like a small voice whispering that the story wasn't completely over. But the world around her didn't have room for such thoughts. Not now. Not with bills piling up and double shifts becoming a habit instead of an exception. Mara placed the tray down behind the counter and glanced at the schedule taped to the wall. Tonight's event was a high-profile charity gala that promised to bring in an impressive crowd. The kind of people who came dressed in fabrics worth more than a month of her salary. The kind of people who expected everything to run perfectly. It made her a little nervous, but she wasn't new to pressure. The other staff members were buzzing around, adjusting table settings and whispering instructions to one another. The event coordinator, a woman who always walked quickly as if she was late for something important, moved from one corner of the room to another, checking every tiny detail. Mara respected her. She didn't always agree with her tough tone, but she understood the weight of responsibility that came with running such events. As Mara walked toward a table carrying a new stack of napkins, she overheard two cooks chatting near the kitchen doorway. "Big crowd tonight," one said. "The kind that wants top-tier entertainment." "They got that pianist, right?" the other asked. "He's supposed to be amazing." "Yeah, they wouldn't dare do an event like this without music." Mara's eyes flicked back to the piano again. She wondered what it would feel like to sit there now, after so many years. Would her fingers remember anything? Would her heart jump back into rhythm the way it used to? She shook off the thought. It didn't matter. She wasn't that girl anymore. She continued placing napkins when one of the veteran waiters, a friendly older man who often encouraged the younger workers, stopped next to her. "Busy night, huh?" he said. "Seems like it," Mara replied with a small smile. "You're one of the calm ones," he said. "Some people get shaky when crowds like this show up. But you keep your balance." Mara shrugged lightly. "I just try to do my job well." He nodded. "That's all anyone can ask." She appreciated the kindness. Small words like that made the long shifts feel a little lighter. The doors to the hall began to open as the first wave of guests arrived. Their voices filled the room with a soft hum, like the start of a storm building slowly. Mara moved around the space with practiced ease, pouring water, guiding people to their tables, and offering polite greetings when needed. But no matter how busy she was, her eyes kept drifting back to that piano. A young couple passed by, commenting on how beautiful the instrument looked. Another guest asked one of the servers what time the pianist would arrive. Every mention of it made Mara's heartbeat pick up slightly, like a reminder she didn't ask for, The truth was, the piano had never stopped being a part of her. Even on nights when she was too tired to think, melodies would rise in her mind, playing themselves softly until she fell asleep. She could still hear the voice of her old teacher telling her to straighten her back, loosen her hands, breathe between phrases. She had been better than good, some said. But talent alone didn't keep the world from shifting. A memory flashed in her mind. A small music studio, dust dancing in beams of afternoon sunlight, her fingers gliding across the keys as if they were alive. Then another memory followed her father becoming ill, her mother working 2 jobs, and Mara putting her dreams aside without hesitation. She had promised herself she would return to music someday. But someday kept getting pushed further away. Now, the closest she got to a piano was walking past one while wearing an apron. The coordinator clapped her hands sharply, gathering the staff for a quick rundown. Mara joined the group, listening carefully. As you all know, the coordinator said, we need everything to run smoothly. The guests tonight expect nothing less than perfection. The pianist should be here within the next hour. Until then, focus on making sure everyone is settled. The staff nodded and split up. The plan seemed simple enough, but Mara could feel a strange tension building in the air. Maybe it was her imagination, or maybe it was something she sensed in instinct she didn't quite understand yet. As she carried a tray of drinks toward a table near the piano, she paused for a moment and let her eyes rest on the keys. They gleamed under the lights, untouched and waiting. She wondered if the guest pianist would treat the instrument gently or play with the confident boldness of someone who never doubted themselves. Either way, she knew the crowd would be impressed. She wished she could feel that kind of certainty again. One of the younger servers walked by and whispered, I heard the pianist tonight is famous. Really? Mara asked. Yeah, I guess big names show up for these events. Must be nice to have a life like that. Mara just nodded. Fame wasn't something she ever wanted, but the chance to play freely again, that was different. That was a longing she tried hard to ignore. As the night went on, more guests filled the hall. The room grew louder, but to Mara, it all blended into a single sound. She moved on autopilot, delivering drinks and clearing plates. But her thoughts stayed somewhere else, somewhere between the past she once lived and the future she didn't know how to reach. Every time she passed the piano, she felt a tug inside her, like a thread pulling gently at the places she kept hidden. Still, she didn't stop to think about it too much. The world didn't pause for personal reflection, especially not on a night like this. When she reached the staff area again, she took a moment to breathe. Her break was still an hour away, but she always stole a few seconds here and there to clear her mind. She looked around at the busy room. People laughed, clinked glasses, and exchanged stories about business deals and weekend trips. None of them could imagine that a waitress walking among them carried a history full of music and unspoken dreams. But that didn't bother her. She didn't need them to know. What she didn't realize was that sometimes life has its own timing. Sometimes it waits for a moment like this, a moment when the world is too distracted to notice what's quietly building beneath the surface. The piano sat in the middle of it all, glowing softly, almost invitingly. Mara shook her head, trying to push away the feeling. She had work to do, and her job didn't leave space for daydreams. But even as she stepped back into the crowd, she couldn't shake the sense that something was about to change. Something small, maybe, or maybe something bigger, something she never saw coming. She didn't know it yet, but the night was far from ordinary. And the piano that had been silent for so long was waiting for the moment when it would no longer be silent at all. The night continued to grow louder as more guests filled the hall, each one adding their own energy to the already busy evening. Mara moved quickly between tables, trying to keep up with the constant requests. Even though she was used to nights like this, There was something different about the atmosphere. It felt tense in a way she couldn't explain. Like everyone was holding their breath without knowing why. A sound of clinking glasses, soft chatter, and polite laughter blended together until it became a steady hum around her. The golden lights above shimmered on the polished tables, and the entire room looked almost too perfect, as if it had been painted rather than built. But beneath that perfect picture, something was about to go wrong. The pianist was supposed to arrive by now. At least, that was what the coordinator had told everyone earlier. But Mara noticed the way the coordinator kept checking the doorway, tapping her fingers against her clipboard, and whispering urgently into her phone. It wasn't normal. She was strict, but she was rarely this unsettled. Mara tried not to stare, but the tension in the air made it hard to ignore. She placed water glasses on a nearby table, then turned slightly and watched the coordinator step away from the group of staff members. "Where is he?" The coordinator whispered harshly into the phone. "You're telling me he canceled now?" "He can't cancel. Now do you understand what's happening tonight? We have over 200 guests waiting." Mara froze, pretending to focus on folding a napkin so her eavesdropping wouldn't be obvious. The coordinator closed her eyes for a second and took a shaky breath. "No, there's no one else. Everyone good is booked. Yes, I understand that emergencies happen, but this is a disaster." She hung up the phone slowly, staring at it like it had personally betrayed her. Mara looked away before the coordinator noticed her. She walked back toward the kitchen, her mind racing. The pianist canceled? How could someone cancel at the last minute for an event like this? The guests were expecting the type of show that matched the club's reputation. Without music, the whole evening would fall apart. He stepped into the kitchen to pick up a tray of appetizers. But even there, the mood had shifted. The cooks were whispering, exchanging worried looks as they worked. "You heard?" one of them said as Mara passed. "About the pianist?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, the coordinator looks like she's going to faint," the cook replied. "The guests won't accept a quiet hall. Not this crowd." Mara nodded, but didn't know what to say. She carried the tray back out to the hall and set it down on a table, forcing herself to stay focused. She tried to push away the growing knot in her stomach. This wasn't her problem. She was just a waitress. The responsibility wasn't hers. But the piano sat in the corner of her vision, looking both lonely and important. She glanced at it again, and something inside her tightened. Her fingers twitched, remembering shapes they hadn't touched in years. She could almost feel the smooth ivory keys, hear the soft echo of notes rising in a quiet room. She had played in small studios, school recitals, even community shows. But never anything like this. Never for a crowd dressed in jewels and tailored suits. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me," a guest said politely. "Do you know when the performance will start?" Mara forced a smile. "It should begin soon, sir." "Good," he said. "I've been looking forward to it. The music is always my favorite part of these evenings." She nodded and walked away before she had to say anything more. Her heart had started beating faster. She didn't like lying, even when she had to dot by the time she made her way back to the staff area. The coordinator was pacing in tight circles, speaking to no one and everyone at the same time. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "We have donors expecting a performance. Some of them flew in just for this. We need music. We need something. Anything." The older waiter nearby tried to calm her. "We can play a recording. You know, something soft. Most people might not even notice." The coordinator shook her head sharply. "A recording? For this event? Absolutely not. They'll know. Trust me, they always know." Mara stayed quiet. She didn't want to attract any attention, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. She could feel something pulling her toward the piano, but she fought against it. It wasn't her place. She was here to serve drinks, not perform. Still, she couldn't help imagining what would happen if she sat down at the piano, just for a moment. Just long enough to play a single song. Would she remember how to control her breathing? Would her fingers still know how to glide across the keys? Would the music come back to her like it had never left? She took a deep breath and tried to steady her thoughts. It didn't matter. She wasn't going to do anything. No one knew she could play. No one would believe her even if she said she could. Minutes passed, but the tension only got worse. Guests started to notice the lack of music. A few of them whispered among themselves, their eyes drifting toward the empty piano. Is the performer late? One woman asked another. Must be, the other replied. It's unlike this place to be unprepared. Every passing comment made the coordinator's anxiety grow more visible. Mara approached a table with a drink order when she heard a pair of guests talking behind her. Imagine paying this much for a ticket only for the entertainment to fall apart, one said. Well, things happen, the other replied. But still, it's disappointing. I was hoping for something special tonight. Mara swallowed tightly. Their disappointment wasn't directed at her, but she felt it anyway. She hated letting people down. Even when she had nothing to do with the issue, she walked back toward the counter and placed down her empty tray. Her steps slowed as her gaze drifted to the piano again. It seemed larger now, as if waiting for someone to notice it needed to be played. She knew she shouldn't think like this, but she couldn't stop the thoughts crawling back to her mind. What if she offered to help? What if she stepped forward and said something? No, that was ridiculous. She hadn't played in years. And even if she somehow gathered the courage, who would take her seriously? She was just a waitress standing in a room full of people who would never believe a hidden talent could appear from someone they barely looked at. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to quiet her thoughts. She needed to focus on her job. But then, the coordinator's voice broke through the noise of the hall. This is a disaster, she said loudly, her voice cracking. I need a miracle. I need someone who can play. Anyone. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard, she could feel it in her fingertips. One of the servers whispered, Do we know anyone? Even someone who can play a simple piece? No, the coordinator said. And even if someone did, the guests expect more than just simple playing. Mara stood frozen behind the counter. Her mind was screaming one thing, but her body refused to move. Tell her, tell her you can play. But she couldn't. Her throat felt tight. The fear of embarrassing herself was stronger than her desire to help. She picked up another tray, her hands shaking slightly, and headed back into the crowd. The room felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves understood the pressure in the air. She stopped near the piano, pretending to adjust the placement of a candle on a nearby table. Her eyes drifted toward the keys again, with so many conversations happening around her. She almost thought she imagined the faint voice inside her saying, You know how to fix this. But she did hear it. It was her own voice. She squeezed the edge of the table, unsure if she was brave enough to do what her heart was urging her to do. The coordinator stepped up on a small platform near the stage, clearing her throat. She forced a smile as she addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay in our musical performance this evening. We appreciate your patience and hope you're enjoying the event so far. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some nodded politely, but others exchanged knowing looks. The coordinator stepped down quickly, her forced smile fading the second she turned away. Mara watched her walk toward the staff area again, her shoulders heavy with the weight of an evening that was falling apart. She didn't want to watch someone struggle. She didn't want the event to fail. And deep inside her, She knew she could help, but courage didn't come easily, not when the fear of being judged lived so close to the surface. She walked slowly toward the back hallway, pretending she was going to refill her tray. But really, she just needed a quiet place to breathe. She leaned against the wall and shut her eyes for a moment. She remembered the feeling of sitting at a piano bench, the smooth wood under her hands, the slight resistance of the keys, the sound that blossomed with every touch. She remembered how alive she used to feel, and she remembered why she had stopped. But sometimes, life didn't wait for you to feel ready. Sometimes it pushed you into moments you never planned for. She opened her eyes and let out a slow, shaky breath. Maybe she could do it, not because she wanted attention, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she knew what it meant to save something a night, an event, a moment, and she knew she had the one skill that could save this one. She stepped forward, still unsure, still scared, but unable to ignore the pull any longer. The piano waited dot, and Mara felt the first spark of courage flicker inside her, just bright enough to take a single step toward the moment that would change everything. Mara stood in the narrow hallway behind the event hall, trying to quiet the storm that had formed inside her chest. The hum of voices from the dining room reached her through the walls, sounding restless and impatient. She pressed her palms against the cool surface of the wall and breathed slowly, hoping it would steady her racing thoughts. But nothing felt steady anymore. The more she tried to calm herself, the more her heart insisted that she had to do something. She knew what that something was. She had known it from the moment the coordinator's voice trembled with panic. But knowing it didn't make it any easier to accept. She closed her eyes and whispered softly to herself, "You can't actually do this." But the truth was, she could. Her hands still remembered. Her mind still remembered. Music had never left her, even when she walked away from it. Every night she felt melodies drifting through her thoughts, sometimes so clearly she could almost hear them in the room with her. It wasn't talent she doubted, it was herself. "Just breathe," she whispered, trying again. The hallway felt too quiet, almost too still. She wished someone was there to tell her what to do, someone who knew her history, someone who understood why stepping forward felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But she was alone, and the decision was hers. She had worked at the club long enough to know how important this night was. Important guests, important donors, important expectations. And somewhere among all of that, a single mistake could ruin the entire event. She didn't want to be that mistake, but she also didn't want to watch the coordinator fall apart, or see the event fail when she had the one skill that could save it. She stepped away from the wall and walked deeper into the hallway. She passed a storage closet, a stack of folded tablecloths, and the door to the staff bathroom. Every step made her legs feel heavier, but she didn't stop. She reached the end of the hallway and turned the corner toward the service entrance. The faint sound of the crowd grew louder again. She peeked into the hall from behind a decorative pillar. The guests were growing impatient. She could see it in the way some of them tapped their fingers on the table, the way others leaned close to whisper about the obvious delay. The coordinator stood in a tight circle with a few staff members, rubbing her forehead with one hand while holding her clipboard with the other. Mara watched her for a moment. She looked tired, more tired than Mara had ever seen her. She looked like someone trying to hold a door closed during a storm, and Mara felt something shift inside her. She couldn't let the night fall apart. Not when she had a chance to stop it, but stepping forward would mean exposing something she had kept hidden for years. It would mean putting herself somewhere she never imagined being again, back in front of an audience. The thought made her stomach twist. Still, something stronger pushed her forward. She took one careful step toward the coordinator, but before she reached her, one of the bartenders rushed past, nearly bumping into her. He whispered urgently to the coordinator, "They're asking again about the music. Some guests are getting annoyed." The coordinator let out a soft groan. "Tell them we're working on it." "But are we?" the bartender asked quietly. The coordinator didn't answer. She just looked away, trying not to show how overwhelmed she was. Mara's heartbeat quickened. Her hands were cold, but she forced herself to take another step. She didn't know exactly what she planned to say or how she was supposed to say it. All she knew was that she couldn't stay silent any longer. Before she could reach the coordinator, someone else rushed over with a new problem. The coordinator moved away, leaving Mara once again standing alone. Uncertain, she hesitated. Her courage wavered. Maybe this wasn't the right moment. Maybe this was a sign she shouldn't do it. She took a step back, but then her eyes drifted toward the piano again. It sat untouched, waiting. The lights above made its polished surface shine, like a spotlight was already pointing at it. No one was near it. It was just there, silent, beautiful, full of possibilities. And suddenly, her mind went back to a memory she didn't expect. She saw herself as a young girl, sitting on a small bench in a cramped living room. Her mother had saved money for months to buy her an old used keyboard, and the day she brought it home, Mara played until her fingers hurt. She remembered the way her mother sat on the couch, smiling softly, even after a long day of work. "You're meant for this," her mother had said. Those words echoed inside Mara now, filling the hollow space fear had built. Maybe she still was. Her breath trembled as she stood there, staring at the piano. She felt pulled toward it, not by pressure, not by expectation, but by something familiar, something that felt like home. Then the coordinator's voice rose above the noise again, this time sharper, more desperate. "Please tell me someone knows a musician," she said to the older waiter. He shook his head. "Not here. We're all just hoping for a miracle." Mara swallowed. A miracle. She didn't believe in miracles. Not the magical kind, anyway. But she did believe in moments that changed everything, because someone decided to be brave. And maybe this was her moment. Her feet began to move before she could stop them. She walked to the coordinator, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if the whole room could hear it. She reached her side, but her voice froze in her throat. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then opened it once more. She began softly. The coordinator didn't hear her. She was too busy giving instructions to the staff. Mara tried again. I need to tell you something." Still nothing. A wave of doubt hit her. Maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe she wasn't brave enough for this. She took a small step back, but before she could fully retreat, the older waiter noticed her hovering nearby. "You all right?" he asked softly. Mara hesitated and whispered, "I can play. The piano, I mean." His eyes widened just a little. Not in disbelief, just in surprise. "You can?" he asked gently, as if asking too loudly might scare her away. She nodded once. "Are you good?" he asked, even more quietly. Mara looked down at her hands. "I used to be." He studied her for a moment, then glanced at the coordinator, who was growing more stressed by the second. "You should tell her," he said. Mara's breath caught. "I'm scared." "That means you're human," he replied. "But you're also the only one with a real chance to fix this." She looked toward the piano again. Her heartbeat steadied just a little. She could do this. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be brave. She nodded slowly and stepped forward again. The older waiter gently tapped the coordinator's arm. "She needs to tell you something." The coordinator turned, her face a mix of exhaustion and worry. "What is it?" she asked quickly. Mara almost backed out. Her throat felt tight, and every fear she had ever held seemed to rise all at once. But she forced herself to speak. I can play, she said softly. The coordinator blinked. Play what? The piano, Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, the coordinator stared at her as if she didn't understand. Then her face shifted into confusion. You? She asked. You can play? Mara nodded, her palms sweating. Yes. The coordinator looked her up and down her apron, her uniform, her tired posture. She didn't look like a performer. She didn't look like someone who could save an event. You can really play? The coordinator asked again, this time with a little skepticism. Mara forced herself to meet her eyes. I can. The coordinator hesitated, torn between doubt and desperation. The room behind them was filling with impatience. A few guests were looking directly at the stage now, clearly annoyed. Finally, the coordinator sighed. At this point, I don't have another option. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you're not sure, if you think there's even a chance you can't do this, tell me now. Because once you sit at that piano, there's no going back. Mara's stomach twisted, but she shook her head. I can do it. The coordinator narrowed her eyes, trying to read her expression. Then she gave a small nod. All right, she said. Go, sit at the piano. Those words felt unreal. Mara nodded slowly and turned toward the instrument. Her legs felt stiff, almost disconnected from her body, but she moved forward anyway. The entire room felt different, now like every sound had faded except for her. Footsteps. She walked past tables filled with people who had no idea what she was about to do. A few guests glanced at her as she passed, but none of them paid much attention. They didn't know she held their entire evening in her hands. When she reached the piano, she paused. Her hands hovered above the glossy surface as she took a slow breath. She pulled out the bench, sat down gently, and placed her fingers on her lap for a moment. Her heart was beating so hard, it made her whole chest shake. But when she finally reached out and rested her fingertips on the keys, something inside her clicked into place. The familiar touch, the coolness of the ivory, the silent promise that the music was still there. She closed her eyes. She wasn't a waitress in this moment. She wasn't the girl who had walked away from her dreams. She was someone who once loved music more than anything. And now, she was someone who would play again. She opened her eyes, took one final breath, and prepared to lift her hands. The room didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The moment she sat down at the piano, the room seemed to shrink around her. It was as if every sound faded away, leaving only the soft rustle of her apron and the quiet click of the bench as she adjusted her seat. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, beating fast and uneven, reminding her that she was sitting in front of the most demanding audience she had ever faced. The people in the room were not just any crowd. They were the kind who spent their nights in fine clothes, who discussed business deals and art collections as casually as others talked about the weather. And now, all of them were staring at her, the waitress who had just stepped out of the shadows. She took a slow breath, hoping it would calm her. It didn't help much. Her hands still trembled slightly as they hovered above the keys. In that moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe it would have been better to stay quiet, to fade into the background like she always did. No one would have blamed her. No one would have expected anything from her. But the thought of backing out now felt worse than the fear building inside her. She had spent years hiding her talent, pushing it aside as life grew heavier. And now, for reasons she didn't fully understand, she felt she owed it to herself to try. The room was so still that she could hear the soft hum of the chandelier lights above her. Some guests leaned forward in their chairs. Others watched with arms crossed, unsure of what they were about to witness. She saw a few doubtful looks, the kind people give when they think they already know the outcome. She didn't blame them. She wasn't dressed like a performer. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, and her apron still held faint marks from spilled drinks and hurried service. No one in that room expected anything extraordinary from someone dressed like her. Her fingers finally touched the cool surface of the keys. The first note she pressed came out soft, almost fragile, like it was searching for confidence. She held her breath, waiting to see if anyone reacted. But the crowd remained still, eyes fixed on her. She let her fingers move again, forming a gentle pattern. Slowly, the fragile sound warmed, filling the wide room with a tone that seemed to belong to someone else, someone braver. She closed her eyes, allowing the music to guide her. The notes flowed more easily now, each one building on the last. It was a simple melody at first, one she had learned many years ago, back when life felt lighter. She had practiced it countless times in her youth, sitting on an old wooden bench in her small living room, her father listening from the kitchen as he pretended to read the newspaper. He always smiled when she played. The memory brought a quiet warmth to her chest, and that warmth spread through her hands. With each passing second, the melody grew richer, steadier. Her nerves didn't disappear, but they softened, overshadowed by the familiar comfort of the piano. It had been a long time since she let herself get lost in music like this. Life had pulled her away from it, one responsibility at a time. Work, bills, long shifts, and quiet worries had replaced the hours she once spent practicing. But the skill never left her. It had only been waiting. A gentle shift in the melody caused the room to react. Someone near the front tilted their head, surprised. A whispered comment rose from the back, but quickly faded as the music grew stronger. She didn't dare look up. She didn't want to break whatever fragile connection she had. Built between herself and the piano dot, her hands moved with more confidence now, creating a soft rise and fall, like quiet waves brushing against a shore. The notes carried emotion, wistful, gentle, and honest. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing because, for the first time in years, the music felt like something she needed to release. As the melody deepened, she shifted into a new passage, letting the music climb higher before bringing it back down in a warm, tender sweep. She didn't think about what the crowd wanted. She didn't think about the fine clothes or the expensive jewelry surrounding her. She thought only about the sound, about how each note carried a small piece of her story. Somewhere in the middle of the piece, she felt the room change. The air no longer felt heavy with tension. It felt almost soft, as if the crowd had collectively leaned in, drawn by something they didn't expect. She heard a sharp breath from someone in the front row. Another guest lowered a glass slowly, careful not to interrupt the moment. Even the staff, usually rushing around the room, had paused at the edges, watching her with wide eyes. She opened her eyes for a moment and glanced across the room. The sight nearly broke her rhythm, not because they looked bored, but because they looked captivated. The same people who moments earlier seemed impatient now seemed moved. Caught in the quiet spell of the music, she continued playing, letting the notes flow more freely. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. She felt a stirring inside her, something she had forgotten, the joy of expression, the feeling of being connected to something deeper than words. Each note felt like a small step toward reclaiming a part of herself she had lost along the way. She shifted into a series of soft, delicate runs. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys, the sound filling the room with a gentle glow. A woman wearing a shimmering necklace covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes glistening. A man seated near the center leaned back in surprise, as if reconsidering every assumption he had made when she first sat down. When she reached the middle section of the piece, the melody softened even more, becoming almost fragile. It reminded her of the quieter moments in her life, the nights she sat at her small kitchen table, counting tips and wondering if she would ever find a way back to her music. She poured all those moments into the keys, letting them blend with the warm memories that had carried her through difficult times. She reached the final part of the piece, the one that always made her slow down, as if trying to hold on to the music just a little longer. The melody stretched out, smooth and heartfelt. She let each note linger in the air, giving it time to settle before moving to the next. The room felt suspended in time, like the world outside had paused to listen. When the last note finally left her fingertips, it floated for a moment before fading into silence. She held her hands above the keys, letting the quiet settle around her. Her heart beat hard in her chest. She didn't dare move. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined everything: the stillness, the attention, the way the room seemed to breathe with her. Then she finally lifted her head and looked around. The entire room was still watching. Some eyes were soft with emotion. Others were wide with surprise. A few guests sat frozen, as if they hadn't realized the piece had ended. The silence stretched on, heavy and meaningful. She swallowed hard. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that fragile silence, she realized something important. She had done it. She hadn't run away from her fear. She hadn't let the weight of the moment crush her. She had stepped forward, even when every part of her wanted to stay hidden. She finally stood up from the bench, her legs unsteady. She didn't expect applause. She didn't expect cheers or praise. She just hoped she had played well enough to avoid embarrassment. But before she could take a step back, something happened. A single pair of hands began to clap. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and clear. Then another pair joined, and another. Soon the applause grew into a full wave, rolling through the crowd like a rising storm. She froze where she stood. The clapping grew louder, stronger, until some guests rose from their seats. The sound filled the hall, warm and overwhelming. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined anything like this. Not tonight. Not ever. The applause continued, growing into something almost celebratory. And for a moment, she let herself take it in: the cheers, the praise, the recognition she had never dared hope for. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if this moment would change her life, or if things would go back to the way they were. But as she stood there, surrounded by applause, one thing became clear. She had been seen, truly seen. And that alone made the moment feel like the beginning of something she had once convinced herself she'd never experience again. The applause still rang in her ears long after it finally softened. She stood beside the piano, hands pressed together in front of her, unsure where to look. The guests were still clapping, some smiling warmly, others shaking their heads in disbelief, as if unsure how a quiet waitress had managed to deliver a performance that seemed to belong on a grand stage. She felt her face warm, though she wasn't sure if it was from embarrassment, relief, or the overwhelming shock of what she had just lived through. She had expected doubt, maybe even disappointment, but not this. Not a room full of strangers, rising to their feet because of something she created with her own hands. A manager waved at her from the side, signaling gently for her to step away from the piano so the evening program could continue. She nodded and slowly walked across the polished floor, trying her best not to make eye contact with the guests still watching her. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but she kept moving, one careful step at a time. A staff member approached her as soon as she reached the side of the room. He looked at her with wide eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. "That was," he whispered, searching for the right word. When he couldn't find it, he simply shook his head in awe. She gave him a small, uncertain smile and continued walking. She slipped back into the hallway behind the dining room, where the chatter from the crowd softened into a distant hum. The hallway felt cooler than the main room, giving her a chance to breathe. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and let her heartbeat settle. Her hands still tingled with the ghost of the notes she had just played. She didn't know what to do next. Was she supposed to return to serving tables? Was she supposed to hide in the back until everything calmed down? No one had told her what came after unexpectedly saving a high-profile event. She looked down at her apron and let out a small, nervous laugh. It seemed almost silly now playing a grand piano in front of important guests while wearing an apron with a faint coffee stain near the pocket, but there was no time to wonder. Within moments, she heard footsteps, and someone called her name softly. When she opened her eyes, she saw the event coordinator walking toward her with a mixture of bewilderment and relief. "There you are," he said, slightly breathless. I don't even know how to thank you. You saved us tonight." She shifted nervously, unsure how to respond. "I'm just glad it helped," she said quietly. "I didn't want the event to fall apart." "It didn't just help," he replied, shaking his head. "You changed the entire atmosphere of the night. Everyone is talking about what you did." Her stomach fluttered with a mix of fear and excitement. "Are they upset?" she asked. "Upset?" He let out a laugh. "They're amazed. Completely stunned. A few guests even asked for your name." She wasn't sure what to say. She had never imagined strangers wanting to know anything about her, let alone guests who lived in a world far different from hers. Before she could respond, the coordinator glanced back toward the dining hall, then returned his attention to her. "There's someone who wants to speak with you after the next segment ends. Don't go anywhere, all right?" She blinked. "Someone important?" "You'll see," he said with a mysterious smile before hurrying away. She was left standing alone again, her thoughts buzzing. She didn't know whether to feel excited or terrified. All she had done was sit down and play. She hadn't gone on stage. She hadn't made a speech. She hadn't even introduced herself. She had simply shared a piece of her heart with the keys, and now it was echoing far beyond what she had expected. She took a moment to gather herself before returning to the staff area. The other workers were waiting for her, crowding around with widened eyes and excited whispers. "What was that?" One of them asked with a grin. "You never told us you could play like that." Another worker shook his head. "I thought the whole thing was going to crash, and then you just sat down like you do this every day." She felt her cheeks warm again. "I didn't really plan it," she said. "I just remembered what it felt like to play." "Well, whatever you did," a coworker said, "you just made this the best shift we've ever had." They laughed light, friendly laughter that made the tension easing from her chest feel even lighter. She appreciated their support, even though she wasn't entirely used to being the center of attention. The rest of the evening passed slowly, though not in a bad way. She couldn't go back to serving tables right away. The coordinator said it would cause too much distraction among the guests. So instead, she helped quietly from behind the scenes, running small tasks, organizing trays, and wiping down surfaces no one would see. Every now and then she peeked into the main room, watching the guests mingle. Some still looked toward the piano, as if expecting her to return. She didn't know how to process any of it. When the event reached its final stretch, the coordinator returned, motioning for her to follow him. Her heart picked up speed as she walked behind him through the hall. She wasn't sure who she was about to meet, or what they might want from her dot. In the far corner of the room stood a tall man with silver hair, dressed in a dark suit that looked both simple and extremely expensive. He was speaking with a small group of guests, but when he noticed her approaching, he excused himself and stepped toward her. "Are you the young woman who played tonight?" he asked in a warm, steady voice. She nodded, suddenly conscious of her plain clothes. "Yes, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt the event. I just wanted to help." He smiled a calm, genuine smile. Help, my dear? You transformed the room. I haven't heard someone play with that level of feeling in years. She swallowed, unsure how to respond. Compliments felt unfamiliar, especially one spoken with such sincerity. Do you study music? He asked. She shook her head. Not anymore. I used to play when I was younger, but life got busy. I haven't had the chance to continue. That's a shame, he said softly. Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away. She looked down at her hands. I just never knew if I was good enough. He studied her with thoughtful eyes. If tonight didn't prove it to you, I hope someday soon something will. In the meantime, I'd like to help if you would let me. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Help? How? He took out a small card from his pocket and handed it to her. I run a small foundation that supports artists, musicians, performers, painters, anyone with passion and talent who needs a bit of support to continue their craft. If you're willing, we can arrange lessons, access to instruments, even small opportunities to perform. She stared at the card in her hand, barely breathing. But why me? Because, he said gently, when someone plays the way you played tonight, you don't ignore it. You honor it. Her vision blurred slightly as emotion rose in her chest. She blinked it away quickly, not wanting to cry in front of someone who looked like he signed million-dollar checks before breakfast. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Take your time, he replied kindly. Think about it. You don't need to decide anything tonight. He gave her a respectful nod and returned to his guests, leaving her standing there with the card pressed against her chest. She felt lightheaded. The hallway seemed brighter. The soft music drifting through the speakers seemed sweeter. Her entire world felt like it had tipped into a new direction. She returned to the staff area slowly, her mind spinning. Her coworkers looked up when she entered. Well? One asked eagerly. What did he want? She hesitated for a moment before answering. He wants to help me. With music. The room fell silent, then erupted into soft gasps and excited murmurs. That's huge, someone said. You have to do it. She wasn't sure. It felt too big, too unreal. The idea that one performance, one moment of courage could open a door she thought had closed forever. It scared her as much as it excited her. When her shift finally ended and she stepped outside into the cool night air, she held the card carefully in her hand. The street was quiet, and for a moment she just stood there, letting the evening breeze brush against her face. She looked up at the sky, feeling a strange blend of peace and nervous hope. She didn't know if she was ready for something so new. She didn't know if she was brave enough to say yes, but she did know one thing. Tonight had shown her that even the smallest moment of believing in herself could change everything. And as she walked toward the bus stop, still holding the card, a tiny spark lit inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. A spark that whispered maybe this was her chance. Maybe it was time. The night after the event felt unreal to her. She lay in bed with her hands resting over her stomach, staring at the ceiling in the dim glow of the streetlight coming through her window. Sleep refused to come, no matter how many times she closed her eyes. Every time she tried, the memories from the evening returned like soft echoes, the gentle shine of the piano keys, the way her fingers had moved without hesitation, the stunned silence, the applause that rose like warm waves, and finally the card now sitting on her bedside table. She turned her head slightly to look at it. A small, simple card with a name and a number, but it felt heavier than any object she had ever owned. It felt like a door she never expected to open, suddenly cracked just enough for light to spill through. She wondered what would happen if she called. What if she wasn't as talented as everyone thought in that moment? What if her emotions had carried the performance more than her skill? What if she disappointed the man who had spoken to her so kindly? The fear churned in her stomach, twisting itself into knots. But mixed with the fear was something else, something warm, hopeful, and unfamiliar. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to dream that the feeling almost scared her. She had learned to live safely, quietly, in the margins of other people's days. The idea of stepping forward, of asking for something more, felt both thrilling and overwhelming. Eventually, exhaustion nudged her into sleep. It wasn't deep or peaceful, but it was enough. When morning arrived, she woke slowly, rubbing her eyes and sitting up in bed. The card was still there. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached for it with careful fingers. She whispered to the empty room, "Maybe not today, but soon." She needed time. Time to breathe. Time to understand what she truly wanted. Over the next few days, life returned to its routine, but everything felt slightly different. When she walked into work, coworkers still looked at her with a mix of admiration and surprise. Some teased her gently. "Playing for the elite now, huh?" One joked, "Don't forget us when you're famous." Another laughed. She smiled shyly, unsure how to respond. Fame was the last thing she thought about. She didn't even know if she could accept the offer yet, but something had changed in her. She walked a little straighter. She felt a little lighter. And whenever she passed through the dining hall, her eyes drifted toward the piano, standing quietly in the corner. She didn't dare touch it again during work hours, but she couldn't stop glancing at it, remembering the feeling of the keys under her hands. One evening, after her shift ended and most staff had left, she lingered near the doorway. The piano sat beneath a soft light, silent and unassuming, as if waiting patiently. She stepped closer. Her fingers brushed one of the keys gently, letting out a single soft note. It made her smile. That sound, simple as it was, reminded her that music had always been a part of her, even if life had forced her to push it aside. She didn't play a full piece, not wanting to disturb anyone still cleaning up. She just touched a few keys, letting the warm notes comfort her. When she turned to leave, she found the night manager standing nearby. "Couldn't stay away, could you?" he said with a smile. She felt her cheeks warm. "Just for a moment." He shook his head. "You have something rare. Don't ignore it." His words stayed with her long after she left for home. As the week went on, she found herself thinking more and more about the offer. She imagined what it would feel like to take lessons again, to sit in a room filled with music, to practice without worrying about the noise or the neighbors or whether she deserved to try. She imagined performing again, maybe not in a grand hall, but somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. But just as hope grew in her chest, doubt tried to pull her back. What if she failed? What if she embarrassed herself? What if this door wasn't meant for her after all? Still, each time doubt whispered, she remembered the applause. She remembered the way the guests stood, the warmth in their eyes, the kindness in the silver-haired man's voice. And she remembered the feeling in her own heart, the one that said she had done something good, something true. Finally, on a quiet morning before her shift, she made her decision. She picked up the card, took a deep breath, and dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, a third time. She almost hung up in a panic. But then a calm voice answered. "Hello?" Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "Hi, it's me. I played at the event last week. You said I could call if I wanted to talk about music." There was a warm pause. Then the voice brightened. "Ah, yes. I'm very glad you reached out. How are you?" "I'm all right," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I've been thinking about your offer, and—" She swallowed. "I think I'd like to try." The smile in his voice was unmistakable. "Wonderful. Truly wonderful. We can take it slowly. Let's schedule a time for you to come in, meet a few people, and see what feels comfortable for you." Her heart lifted. "Okay, I'd like that." They arranged a meeting for later in the week. When she hung up, she pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she just breathed, letting the reality settle in. She had taken the first step. The next few days passed in a blur of nervous excitement. She told no one, not yet. She wanted to be sure first, wanted to see the place with her own eyes before sharing anything. When the day arrived, she dressed neatly but simply. She didn't have fancy clothes, but she made sure she looked presentable. She tied her hair back, slipped on her cleanest shoes, and carried a tiny notebook in her bag just in case she needed it. The building she visited was modest on the outside, but the moment she stepped inside, she felt the energy of creativity. The hallway walls were decorated with framed photographs of musicians and artists. Soft music drifted from behind one of the doors. Her heartbeat quickened. The silver-haired man greeted her in the lobby with a warm smile. "I'm glad you came." She returned the smile shyly. "Thank you for inviting me." He walked her through the building, showing her small practice rooms, a recording space, and a modest stage used for community performances. She watched everything with wide eyes, taking in every detail. "This place is for people like you," he said gently. "People with talent and heart who simply need a chance." She didn't know how to respond. Gratitude swelled inside her, thick and warm. They entered a small room with a polished upright piano. The light from the window fell softly across the keys. "I'd like you to meet someone," he said. A woman stepped forward, an instructor with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I've heard so much about your performance," she said. "I'd love to hear you play whenever you feel ready." The woman didn't push. She didn't rush. She simply waited. With a small breath, she walked toward the piano and sat down. This time, her hands didn't shake. She played a short piece, nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. Just a simple melody she used to practice when she was young. The notes floated gently through the room, warm and steady. When she finished, she looked up nervously. The instructor smiled. "You have something special. I would be honored to teach you." Her eyes stung, but she held back tears. She nodded instead. "I'd like that." From that moment, everything began to shift. Her days were still filled with work, long hours, and everyday responsibilities. But now, her evenings held something new: lessons, practice sessions, quiet moments of rediscovering the music she thought she had lost. Every time she sat at the piano, she felt more like herself, more whole, more alive. Her coworkers noticed her changed mood. "You seem happier," one said. She smiled softly. "Maybe I am." Weeks passed, then months. She grew stronger, more confident. Her instructor taught her new techniques, new ways of expressing emotion through music. She practiced late into the evenings, sometimes losing track of time. And slowly, her world expanded. Small performances came next, simple community events where she played for small audiences. Nothing like the elite crowd from that night, but these audiences were warm, welcoming, supportive. She didn't seek fame. She didn't chase recognition. She simply played because it made her feel alive. One evening, as she walked home after a performance, she stopped beneath a quiet streetlight and looked up at the sky. She thought back to the night. Everything changed the night she stepped up to the piano, wearing an apron and trembling hands. The night she decided to be brave. She realized something important. That moment had not been an accident. It had been the beginning of reclaiming a dream she once believed was lost, the beginning of seeing herself not just as a waitress, but as someone capable of more. And the beginning of a life where music once again had a place. As she continued walking, a soft smile touched her lips. Her journey was far from over, but she was Longer afraid, she had found her voice again, and this time she wasn't letting it go.